Hello, I'm John Gaver, author of The Rich Don't Pay Tax, or Do They? And I would like to take a few minutes to disprove a very common myth that has been perpetrated about the fair tax. The myth that I'm talking about is that tax evasion would increase under the fair tax. The fact is that far from tax evasion getting worse under the fair tax, we'll prove here that quite the opposite is true. Under the fair tax, there cannot help but be much, much less tax evasion than under any form of income tax or even a VAT. In fact, this myth is so weak and tenuous that to say that I'll disprove it is a huge understatement. By the end of this video, you will have such a solid understanding of the tax evasion issue that you will never again be able to be fooled into falling for this myth. Since I won't just disprove it, I'm going to completely shatter it. It all comes down to what investigators often refer to as choke points. A choke point is either an action or a person that must be involved if a specified crime, in our case tax evasion, is to happen. As you'll see, when talking about tax evasion, the choke points are people, not actions. It should also be noted that choke points are so important that criminal investigators use choke points as starting points to kickstart an investigation. Simply put, choke points represent the only opportunities for a particular crime to occur. So what this all boils down to is that before we begin our tax compliance proof, we need a benchmark in the form of income tax choke points. And for that, we'll use published IRS data. According to official IRS tax statistics, we had roughly 159 million unique taxpayers in the 2018 tax year. That's the latest tax year for which this publication is available. The reason this number is important is because under any form of income tax, it takes nobody but the actual taxpayer to commit tax fraud. Nobody else needs to know or participate in the crime. So what this means is that under an income tax, every taxpayer is a choke point and represents an opportunity for tax fraud. For the record, there would still be roughly the same number of opportunities for tax fraud under any form of income tax, including a flat income tax. But under the fair tax, the only tax filers are retail businesses, and in the United States, we're dealing with only about 25 million retail businesses and service providers. Under the fair tax, these are the only entities that would remit taxes to the government. In fact, under any form of sales tax, in order for tax evasion to occur, at least one of those retailers would have to be involved. So under the fair tax, there would be only 25 million opportunities for tax evasion, as opposed to the 159 million opportunities that exist under an income tax. So under the fair tax, there would be only 25 million opportunities for tax fraud, as opposed to the 159 million opportunities that exist under an income tax. That translates to just 1/6 as many opportunities for tax evasion under the fair tax as exist under every type of income tax. So if there's only 1/6 the opportunities for tax evasion under the fair tax, this means that for tax evasion to be as bad under the fair tax as under any form of income tax, 6 times as many people would have to be willing to commit tax fraud. That would be an impossible shift in the essential nature of Americans. That's not going to happen. But we're just getting started. That alone is enough to disprove the fair tax evasion myth. But remember, I promise to not just disprove that myth, but to shatter it. So building on that number, consider that evading a sales tax requires at least 2 people acting in concert, either the retailer and his customer or the retailer and his supplier. This is where tax evasion would have to occur under the fair tax. So since sales tax evasion requires 2 people, this means that it would take not just 6 times more people being willing to commit tax fraud, but 12 times more people. That's really not going to happen. But did I say I was going to shatter this myth? Well, it gets better. From the 45 states where sales taxes are currently collected, we know that the top 10% of retailers, the big box stores and the national chains, are responsible for 90% of sales tax revenue. But we also know that the point of sale and inventory systems that are critical to those big national chains make sales tax evasion at those businesses virtually impossible. Anyone who might consider even trying would know going in that the system would catch him. So what this means is that under the fair tax, only 10% of sales tax revenue would come from sources where tax evasion is even a possibility. So it follows that for fair tax evasion to be as bad as income tax evasion, it would take not 12 times more people being willing to commit tax fraud, but a whopping 120 times more. But we're not done yet. We've disproven this myth, but we still have to shatter the pieces that are left. So consider this. Any time that two unrelated parties collude to commit a crime, a second, more serious crime has been committed. It's called conspiracy, and it generally carries its own penalty, making the total sentence more severe. So what this means is that for tax evasion to be as bad under the fair tax as under any form of income tax, 120 times more people would have to be willing to commit a more serious crime. But it doesn't even end there. You see, tax auditors who have audited both income and sales taxes tell us that it's far easier to spot attempted tax evasion under a sales tax than under an income tax, because under a sales tax, there are no elaborate tax shelters or loopholes for auditors to have to deal with. There is no complex tax code. A sales tax is very straightforward. And more importantly, it leaves a paper trail involving at least two people. Of course, you know what they say about a secret. It's only a secret till two people know it. This means that sales tax auditors only have to get one of the minor players to come clean in exchange for a virtual slap on the hand in order to bring down the offending retailer or supplier. This all means that for tax evasion to be as bad under the fair tax as under any form of income tax, not only would 120 times more people have to be willing to commit a more serious crime, but a crime that is more easily detected than income tax evasion. Think about it. It's not going to happen. The arguments from the establishment are beyond absurd. Because if what these detractors want you to believe was true, then for every one person who is currently evading the income tax, an additional 119 more Americans would have to change their core principles, the thing that has kept them from committing tax fraud up to this point, and change those values in order to commit a more serious crime that carries a more severe jail sentence and that is more easily detected and prosecuted. But that's not all. The most absurd part of their argument ignores the fact that this change in their core principles would be motivated by a desire to evade a tax that costs them less money than the income tax that they are not currently evading. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not even a remote possibility. Any noise that you hear about fair tax evasion is nothing but a myth perpetrated by the establishment tax and spenders in Congress who are afraid of losing all the super PAC money that comes from inserting tax breaks into the income tax code. So the next time some swamp dweller, regardless of party affiliation, and they're both guilty, tries to tell you that tax evasion would increase under the fair tax, you know without a doubt that they're trying to perpetrate a myth. Go back through this video again and work the numbers for yourself. It cannot be denied. The facts shatter this myth because the facts show conclusively that tax evasion will be dramatically reduced under the fair tax. I encourage you to learn more about the fair tax. Check out FAIRtax.org. Then to learn even more, read The Rich Don't Pay Tax, or Do They? Also watch for the upcoming book, The Tax Deception. But whatever you do, I urge you to support the fair tax and support members of Congress and candidates who support the fair tax, and oppose those who pander for votes by peddling mere tweaks to the current failed system, or worse yet, by pushing a flat income tax scheme that they know won't stay flat. The fair tax is the only tax reform plan that makes further tampering with the rate politically hazardous. It will dramatically improve tax compliance, as you've seen here, and it will absolutely abolish the IRS. Thank you.